Welcome to the Loadout Music Podcast, featuring intimate conversations with emerging and established musicians, recorded at the Gaslight Studios in St. Louis. And now your host, Aaron Perlett. Welcome back to another episode of the Loadout Music Podcast. I am your host, Aaron Perlett, and we are presented by Wellbeing Brewing and Shinesty, as always. And today we are joined by one of my favorite singer-songwriters, Mr. Paul Thorn, who not only has a day named after him in the state of Mississippi, but he's someone you do not want to take a left hook from, allegedly. So, Paul, thanks you so much for joining us today. This is a real treat for me. I appreciate you being on the show.
Man, I'm glad to be here, Aaron. How are you doing these days?
I'm doing well. You have a kind of, to me at least, a fascinating life story. In that, I know you basically spent most all your life living in Tupelo, but you early in your career you were a prize fighter, you were a boxer, and I believe you fought Roberto Duran at one point. If I have my history correct.
You do have your history correct. In 1988, I had came up pretty high in the ratings of national ratings as a boxer, and it led to me having a fight that wound up being the climax of my whole career. Even though I lost the fight in 1988, I fought Roberto Duran. It was on national TV, and I gave my best effort. After 6 rounds, I had done fair in the fight, but after 6 rounds, when I sat on my stool, the doctor stopped the fight because I had a horrific cut it was bleeding real bad. And so they stopped the fight between the 6th and the 7th. But also the good news is I cut him during that, and we actually rode to the hospital in the same ambulance. So it was a nice night.
Did he say no mas to you in the ambulance?
No, and that's a sore subject with me, actually. I know when you say that, that's coming from a good place. I know it is. But one thing that irritates me about the no mas thing is the average armchair fan of boxing only knows Roberto Duran for his worst night of his entire career. The one night, I personally think he had a horrible stomach problem and he had to quit, because this man was not a quitter, and he was one of the greatest fighters who ever lived, and almost knocked out every single person he ever fought. And I hate that people remember him, the casual fans, as no mas, because to me he was manos de piedra, hands of stone. He was one of the greatest fighters who ever lived. And when I fought him, I really got a taste of what a great fighter is. And by that, I mean, I fought a lot of guys that hit hard, and that's what he's kind of known for. But what his true gift is, in my opinion, is his ability to avoid getting hit himself. His defense and the ability to just slightly move just inches and make you miss. To me, that's what made him special, because, when you're in a boxing ring, when you're in a boxing match and you can't hit your opponent, it's extremely hard to win.
Yeah, well, I mean, that was an amazing era of boxing as well, especially at the middleweight level. I mean, there were just so many historically great boxers that were at or around that weight level, from Tommy Hearns to Marvin Hagler to Sugar Ray to Duran.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right. Duran had a phenomenal career. Phenomenal.
Oh, my God. Well, what people don't understand another thing about Duran is Duran was, when he first won a championship, he weighed 135 pounds, which is lightweight. But he was lazy. As talented as he was lazy when it came to training. And so he would balloon up and get real heavy. And even though he was naturally 135, he could blow up to 160 and be out of shape and still be able to compete with the hosses of that time. I mean, if he hadn't run out of gas, he would have literally beat Marvelous Marvin Hagler. The only reason he was actually ahead on the scorecards until he ran out of gas. And you know what? When you're fat and out of shape, you're going to run out of gas.
Yes, you are.
But even at his worst, he almost beat Marvin Hagler. So I mean, these people are not trained. These people are born.
Yeah.
You can't teach somebody to be like that. I mean, you could teach a bunch of kids how to play basketball, but there's only going to be one Michael Jordan amongst that group, somebody that has that extra gift. And that's the way Duran was. He was a marvel. And, even though I lost to him, it's something that it's one of the most proudest moments of my life, because I made it to a level to, they don't just let you get in there and fight. You gotta whoop some folks along the way. So I did win a lot of fights and I whooped some people, but boy, to get in there with him, it was an eye-opening experience, and it's something that I'll always be proud of. Even though I lost, that I even got to get in there with somebody like that.
Yeah, I can only imagine what it's like to someone who's so well chronicled in the history of boxing, to be able to just simply say, I was in a ring with that guy. That's pretty amazing.
And I got some, man, it was completely one-sided. I got some punches in. It was kind of like I had a BB gun, but he had a 12 gauge. It's kind of like that.
Yeah. So
go ahead.
So
Sorry.
I'm guessing that before that point in your life, you had picked up a guitar and discovered music at some point, and at least had played growing up. Because one of the things I have found that I believe is very underrated about your music career is that you're a great guitarist. And I don't think you get enough recognition. You get a lot of recognition for your songwriting, for your voice, but you are a fantastic guitarist. And I can only assume that this is something you picked up when you were a kid growing up.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. But my father's a Pentecostal minister, and I grew up playing guitar in church. I never had any formal lessons. I learned to play guitar from old men that came to church and who had like old guitar. They'd just bring their guitars to church and they'd sit there and they'd play along with the hymns that was being done. And I learned, G, C, and D, and then eventually I learned E minor, and then I'm kind of self-taught just by watching other people I grew up around, and learn from going to church. That's really where I got my start playing guitar. So.
Which when you listen to it, it's funny when you look at the way your music is described. You see everything from Southern rock to Americana to country to blues, but you hear a lot of gospel in your music. So that makes a lot of sense if you came up playing in church while your dad was preaching.
Yeah, well, I left out the fact that I live in Tupelo, Mississippi, and the churches I went to, literally, some of those churches were the exact same church that Elvis Presley attended when he was a kid. And so the mojo and the swagger and the dancing and the black gospel rhythm, Elvis got all that stuff just like me from the church. That's everything he did. Like when he got banned on the Ed Sullivan Show for being too vulgar, that little twist and dance he was doing actually was a dance that people did in church when they were under the spirit of the Holy Ghost. When the Holy Ghost would get on them, they would start dancing like that. And it's kind of erotic looking, actually, and it is kind of sexual looking. But that actually came from church too. So many things, like, I'm flipping around, but people like Aretha Franklin, her daddy was a preacher too. And everything she got, all her mojo, all her chops, every bit of it came from growing up in a Pentecostal church. And that's where I give all my credit to.
Yeah, and you see a lot of black music came out of the church, but even if you look into the country genre, there's kind of, this dissection within the country music genre, and that is you've got the Tennessee Southeast based sound that kind of came out of the church, but then you've got kind of the more Texas-oriented country that seem to come out of the honky tonk, and they've become two very different sounds today. But it is amazing how much music was influenced by the church, whether it's white or black music, and across a variety of genres.
Yeah, well, I left out another thing. There was two types of churches that I attended as a kid. There was the black churches who did the rhythm and blues that I'm talking about, and then at the white churches, just like you said, there was a country. It was a different. The white people had a good music, but it leaned more toward country western style. And so I actually have a lot of my influences from country music as well. I had country gospel and I had black gospel. And that's the foundation to me of all music. It really is. That and, the Delta blues. That's where there ain't no other places I can think of from where this kind of stuff came from.
As a white kid growing up in the South, was it peculiar for you to to find yourself in a black church? Did you stand out there, or was it something that was very comfortable for you?
It was very comfortable for me because, when I was in the environment I grew up in, I didn't know anybody who was like racist or anything like that. We were so all inclusive that, there wasn't no talk of any of that stuff. And it just didn't exist.
Yeah.
And I may have forgotten what you was trying to ask me because I got sidetracked. But what was the question again?
You kind of were getting to it, just that if you ever found yourself uncomfortable or standing.
Oh no, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah,
that's what I'm saying. When there were, when I say black churches and white churches, we did go to separate churches technically, but because the black people had a different way of singing, they had a different rhythm to their music, they had a different way of worshiping, and but we would always go visit each other's churches, and there was everybody was always welcome, and everybody was glad to see each other, and it was just such a fertile ground for me to grow as an artist, and I didn't know I was growing as an artist, but I was becoming an artist through that whole experience. I give all credit to it.
Yeah, and you feel that a lot in your music. And there's not every one of your records, but there are certain records that are very gospel influenced. You actually have choirs in some of them. They give you this big booming background. And again, it's different because you have different records that have different sounds on them. I imagine that's by design with how you were feeling and what you were trying to create as you went into each session.
Yeah. What I did, it's like back when I was high school, I thought my hair looked good as an afro. But now that I look back to my old pictures, it looked ridiculous. So I said all that to say, what I do musically changes. The stuff I did 10 years ago, I'm doing something different now. And I like to think I'm growing. And I just, I've got a brand new record out now that's unlike anything I've ever done.
Yeah, and that's Never Too Late to Call. And it's actually a terrific album. It just came out in August. I'm curious, you said earlier, you were growing as an artist, but you didn't really know that you were growing as an artist. You didn't even know you were an artist. At what point, and maybe this was after boxing or during or even before, did you say to yourself, this is something that I could do, that I can start to make a career of and play in front of people on a regular basis?
Well, after I lost to Duran, I had 3 more fights. And I won them all, but they were against lesser opposition. And I got to a point where I realized that even though I was pretty good at boxing, I wasn't ever going to be a world champion. I just didn't have that little extra something that you have to have. And so that's when I went back into my music. And one detail I left out is, even when I was boxing, when you're boxing, unless you're a superstar like Roberto Duran, you don't get paid very much for fighting. And so I didn't make very much money fighting. So I had to have a day job. So my day job was, I worked in a furniture factory building furniture. And then at night, me and this guy I met, Billy Maddox, we started writing songs together. And we wrote songs literally for 12 years. 2 nights a week we would meet and write songs. And and we would send out cassette tapes like a lot of people do to get noticed back in that time. And one of the cassettes made it to the ear of Miles Copeland, who was at that time managed Sting and the Police.
Stuart Copeland's brother.
That's right. And so they sent a representative down, strange as this sounds, to Tupelo, Mississippi, to hear me playing at this other gig I had one night a week. I was playing in a pizza restaurant for $50 plus tips a night.
That was Vanelli's, right? Is that the
name? Vanelli's, that's right.
Yeah.
And so this dude came in, and he had a suit on, and he was writing down things. Every song I would sing, I see him writing down stuff. And when I took a break, this guy said, "Look," he said, "I work for Miles Copeland," and he said, "We've gotten this cassette of yours, and we love your songs, and we're here to offer you a publishing deal and a record deal on A&M Records." And so I literally, 2 weeks in 2 weeks, I was able to quit my job. They gave me money, had money to live on. I got a record deal. And being a preacher's kid, I never had been to a concert in my entire life. It was against our religion. So the very first concert I ever attended was when I opened for Sting in front of 13,000 people in Nashville, Tennessee. And I had no band. It was just me and that guitar, just like that in the restaurant. And people always say, "Paul, were you not nervous?" And it sounds arrogant when I say this, but strangely, I wasn't nervous because of what I just told you earlier. I spent my whole life being in front of people singing and playing. So I was already ready for it. And I was accidentally prepared for it. And so I went out there, and to me, 13,000 people looked just like 13 people. It was the same thing. And so I went out there, and I had confidence, and I got a good response. And I wound up getting a tour opening up for Sting, if you can believe that. And then when that petered out and that ran its course, I got another offer from Jeff Beck, the guitar player, had heard about me. And he had heard that there was this kid from Tupelo who could entertain any crowd with just an acoustic guitar. And, they were interested in that. And they were also interested in somebody who could get on and off the stage quickly. So I got another tour opening up for Jeff Beck. We did about 30 shows together. And then I got all these other offers doing with these other artists. I mean, I got a tour with Mark Knopfler. I got all kind of stuff. And what was happening while that was going on, though, is even though those people that came didn't come to see me, the next time I would go back into that town 6 months later, some of them people who remembered me came back to see me on my own when I did my solo show. So over time, doing all these opening slots, I actually developed my own audience, and which I have to this day. And every year I've been doing this, with the exception of the pandemic year, my following has grown, and it's always been bigger every single year. And I'm not a household name or anything like that, but in the Americana world and the world of touring artists, I have a following, and it's a loyal following.
We are talking to the great Paul Thorn. We will be back right after these messages. Hey, this is Aaron Perlett, and for those who have been listening, know that Well-Being Brewing is pretty much my favorite drink in the world because I quit drinking alcohol a couple years ago and discovered Well-Being, and it really has been my salvation. I am fortunate to be joined by Jeff Stevens, who is the founder and CEO of Well-Being. Jeff, first of all, thank you so much for being a partner with The Loadout, and tell us about, this is such a unique non-alcoholic beer because it actually tastes like great beer.
Yeah. Well, thank you for saying that, because that's the most important thing for us. We invested a lot of money into figuring out how to make great non-alcoholic craft beer. And that was something that I was really interested in. And to have someone like you say, you know what, I can drink this beer and do all the things that I would normally do and don't miss a thing, that makes it all, so great for us.
And it is a craft beer. I mean, I was from the time I was probably 14 or 15, I was a drinker until I was the time I was about 47.
Yeah.
And I have always been a beer guy, beer and bourbon. And I especially got into more flavorful beers over the past 10 years. But Well-Being, whether it's the Hellraiser Amber or the Well-Being, and you've actually got, or the IPA rather, and you've got a pretty nice group of growing products that are pretty impressive. But what's the secret to, I mean, when you compare it to some of the other more watered down imitators, what's the secret to making it so good?
Yeah, there's several ways you can make non-alcoholic beer, and we chose this way called vacuum distillation. So what it allows us to do, and this is the thing that comes through, is we fully ferment the beer. We make it just like you'd normally make alcohol beer. So it's ready to be alcohol beer, and then we take it, put it in a vacuum, lower the boiling point of the beer, and gently remove the alcohol. So what you're left with is all the mouthfeel and the flavor of beer without the alcohol. And I think that's where our products are distinct, is that mouthfeel, that aroma, that flavor that really comes through, versus you can stop the fermentation. That's another method. And those are a little more watery, I think, or just don't quite hold up as well, if that makes sense.
That makes sense. Well, Jeff, thank you so much for being a partner. If you want to sample Well-Being, you can go to wellbeingbrewing.com and use the code Loadout10 at checkout, and you will get a discount on Well-Being from being a Loadout listener. Jeff, thank you so much for being a partner, and thank you so much for making this amazing product.
Aaron, my pleasure. Thank you for drinking it.
And we're back on the Loadout Music Podcast. Today we are joined by Paul Thorn. Paul, right before the break, you were talking about how you opened for Sting and Jeff Beck, obviously two Rock and Roll Hall of Famers. And when you were talking earlier about Roberto Duran and the honor it was to share the ring with him, reaching kind of the pinnacle of your boxing career, was it kind of a similar feeling when you're opening up for legendary performers like a Sting or like a Jeff Beck? Was it a similar feeling, or was it something altogether different?
No, it absolutely was a similar feeling, because, Roberto Duran was an elite boxer. Well, Sting, and I'm just using these guys as an example, and Sting and Jeff Beck, they're elite in their field, And I came to this way of thinking from Muhammad Ali, who was one of my heroes. You will never hear me say, you will never hear Paul Thorn say, I am the greatest. You'll never hear that. But if you really want to do this and you want to be good, you have to believe this: I'm one of the greatest. Don't ever call yourself the greatest, but be confident enough to say, I'm one of them. I'm not the best, but I'm one of them. And once I believed that, and when I did the shows with Sting and Jeff Beck and whoever, maybe deep down, if I'm honest, there was a little bit of insecurity going in. That's a little bit, but after I got my feet wet and I saw that I could do it, I started believing in myself. I started believing, like, not so much as Muhammad Ali, where he would say, I am the greatest. I just want to believe in my heart, I'm one of them.
Yeah.
I'm one of them. If you're going to be great at anything, you have to believe it in your heart. And so I don't believe I'm the greatest. I just believe I'm one of the greatest. And that's okay. You need that.
So earlier you were talking about when Roger Sovine found you playing at Vanelli's and you got signed to BMI, and you ended up with A&M Records. You only really did one record with them, and then you and Billy Maddox, I believe, decided you were going to self-produce your records from then. I'm sure some people must have said, you're crazy, man. You've got a record deal and you're going to leave this and go do this on your own. What pushed you to do that? What was the rationale behind that?
Okay. Well, when I got my record deal with A&M and everything looked like, sunshine and roses, but being green and not knowing anything about the music business, I didn't know that A&M, at the same time my record was coming out, A&M was being bought out by a larger company called Interscope. And so any and all artists who were not already established stars guess what? Got dropped. So I got my record, my first record actually, in reality, never properly was even put out.
Yeah.
So it was just like a bad joke on me. And so we got dropped, so we had no record label. But Billy and I decided that we had a recording studio. And at that time, when CDs were actually a thing that sold, we just printed our own CDs. We printed our own merchandise. We rent when we first started out, we rented a van. And we said, you know what? We're just going to go out there and build an audience. And we did. And I can't proclaim this as 100% true, but I really believe that Billy and I, and our record company we started, we might be the very first truly independent artists. I can't think of anybody else.
Yeah.
And when I say independent, I mean truly independent. Because when you talk to most kids that's on an independent label, yeah, they're on an independent label, but it ain't their label. They're on an independent label that belongs to somebody else. But every time I leave the door of my house, even to this day, whatever CD I sell, whatever T-shirt I sell, whatever Paul Thorn bumper sticker I sell, whatever I get paid for my shows, it all goes to me.
Yeah.
And my business partner Billy Maddox to this day. And I'm 57 years old, and me and Billy has had a business together with a handshake only agreement since I was 17 years old.
Yeah, I had a similar conversation with our last guest, BJ Barham from American Aquarium. He has a similar deal because while the band is in name American Aquarium, it's really him, and he's done the same thing. And we were talking about just the money that's in records today, and that is there isn't a lot of money. But BJ said to me, you know what? There's decent money if you own your own publishing, if you're producing your own music. And have you found that because I'm sure, you talk with other artists and they talk about, I'm sure, how they're getting screwed by the record label, but you don't have anyone that's screwing you. I mean, it's your deal.
No, it's like I said, yeah. I mean, record companies been playing that same. Well, first of all, I feel like record companies are going to go extinct if they hadn't already, because they're scrambling just to figure out ways how to make money. And, they're signing these young kids now that are just excited to be involved in anything. And they sign these contracts where the record company owns everything, their merchandise. I mean, it's cruel. And it's a game that's been played for many years on gullible people. And I'm sorry for a lot of artists to get caught up in them things. But I didn't. I'm very fortunate.
So, I spent a lot of time just kind of going through your entire catalog. Pimps and Preachers, which is just a terrific record, came out in 2010. And it is basically your Twitter handle, Pimps Preachers, which I found pretty funny. But it's what fascinated me about your music is kind of the evolution of it. But in 2014, you put out an album called Too Blessed to Be Stressed. And you said that you wrote the songs hoping to put people in a positive mindset so they count their blessings and like you count yours. And I'm curious what it was that said to you, you know what, I need to inspire people around me. Music is a great way to do it. That's my medium. But what was it in 2014? I apologize to go back so far in your career, but that made you say, you know what, I need to do something inspirational to inspire other people?
Oh, well, my father, like I said, my father was a Pentecostal preacher, and his brother, my uncle, was actually a real pimp. He was a pimp. And so my father and my uncle were huge influences in my life. And I learned from them that nobody you meet's all good and nobody you meet's all bad. And everybody deserves a shot at redemption. And when I wrote the song Pimps and Preachers, I wanted to do a whole record that gave everybody something, a positive way of looking at life. And because even though, pimping is a horrible thing that exploits, people, even in that world, there's goodness. And I just wanted to do a record that put an exclamation point on the point that there is good and there is hope and there's positivity, but you got to look for it, and because it's there.
All right, Paul, you got to help me here. How does a minister, I mean, this sounds like a bad joke you tell in a bar, a minister and a pimp walk into a bar. How does a minister and a pimp come out of one family? I mean, that's an interesting story.
Yeah. Well, my dad, like I said, my dad's been a preacher since he was 12 years old. And my uncle, who became a pimp, he got drafted to Vietnam. And then when he got out of the service, he never came home. We didn't hear from my uncle for 10 solid years. And we thought he was dead. And then one night he called out of the blue, and he had resurfaced, and he said he wanted to reconnect with his family. And when he came back, he had been living in San Francisco and Los Angeles and just traveling around, living the free life. But he was a literal pimp. He was a pimp. And the term pimp gets glorified, unfortunately, but it's not. A pimp is probably the most despicable, heinous person you'll ever meet, because when a pimp approaches you, it's for one reason: to get something from you. And when you're out on the street and you got no home, and you're a fast talker, it's so easy to find runaway girls and girls who are on drugs. And pimps come in and they become a father figure to these runaways, and they give this illusion to these runaways that they're going to be like a father figure and that they're going to build a life together and all this stuff. But it's all a lie. It's all a lie. And that's what my uncle did, and he's not proud of it. But in his defense, you have to understand, this was a long time ago when they were doing this. But now my uncle has redeemed himself, and he's in his early 70s. And now his profession is he drives a van for an old folks home. And now he has all these chances to redeem himself, and he has redeemed himself. But all that being said, I'm still glad I got to be around somebody like that, because because now I have this ability where I can see light and I can see dark too.
Was when he was reconnecting with the family, was at that point when he was trying to put that part of his life behind him of being a pimp?
Not initially. No, he was doing some pimping back in Mississippi too. Yeah. And I was young and green. I didn't understand. Sometimes he would leave, and I would say, "Where you going?" And he would say, "I'm going on a fundraiser." and I didn't understand what that was, but he was pimping. And so when he said he was going on a fundraiser, what he really meant was he was going to check his traps. That's what they call them. They call them traps. When they put a girl on the corner, that's a trap. And they go back to see if they caught anything. and he used to tell me stories about, and pimps are hard on people, man. Pimps are hard on their hoes. And he would say, he would pull up to the corner and he'd crack the window, and it might be raining, and one of the girls might complain and say, "It's raining out here." And he, what his response would be? Run between the raindrops. They're cold, man. Pimps are cold.
Man. We are talking to singer-songwriter Paul Thorn. We will be right back after this final message from one of our sponsors. And now a quick word from one of our sponsors. Have you ever wanted a tightly wrapped American flag around your waist with a giant bald eagle face placed squarely on your junk? Or how about a Steve Harvey coronavirus mask? Or maybe the next evolution of jorts in the form of a hot and sexy denim Speedo. But maybe, just maybe, you're dying for a pair of Kansas City Chiefs overalls or even leopard pants. Yes, 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 and most definitely yes. And it's all pretty easily found at Shinesty, the perfectly weird party gear website that I find myself escaping to every time I need a mental break from the miserable 2020 we've been having. So check out our new sponsor at shinesty.com. That's the word shine, STY.com, and use the code LOADOUT15, that's LOADOUT15 at checkout. Now back to this less than spectacular show. And we're back with singer-songwriter Paul Thorn. Paul, right before the break, we were talking about that kind of interesting makeup of your family, particularly your father and his brother, your uncle. And I'm curious, you seem to take life very seriously. I mean, clearly you have fun. We've joked a couple times here, but you seem to take life pretty seriously, which, doesn't surprise me for someone who used to be a boxer. I mean, that's a pretty serious profession. You grew up in the church, obviously, with your father as a strong influence in your life. Is that still a strong influence, your faith today in your life? And if so, how does that impact your music?
Well, faith, that's a big word. I grew up in the church and I learned about Jesus Christ and I got a lot of good things. And I think I've talked a lot about what those good things are. But, when I left home at 18 and I went out into the broader world and I got to even go to other countries, I met people that they didn't pray to Jesus. They prayed to something else. And I came to this awakening, at least for me, that it seems to me like, I could be wrong, but it seems to me like what people believe and their faith becomes usually is whatever their culture tells them is true. And so I got to a point where I don't think anybody knows what happens when life ends. I don't think anybody has a clue. Everybody claims, well, not everybody, but a lot of people claim to know, Christians believe that, if you're saved by Jesus, you're going to go to heaven. And if you're not saved by Jesus, you're going to go to hell and burn in a fire for eternity. That, my friend Aaron, I don't believe, because that's not a merciful God right there. That's Buford Pusser, man. You know who is?
Yeah.
Huh?
Yeah.
That's Buford Pusser. Buford Pusser's a nice guy, but you piss him off, he'll hit you in the head with a club, And so I no longer believe that. Am I a believer? Yeah, I'm a believer in that there's something bigger than me out there, but anymore, I don't know what that entity's name is or what it is. And people I grew up with church with, to hear me say that, they would say, "Poor Paul, he's blasphemed. He's going to hell." Well, so be it. I don't believe that.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up, because this is kind of where I was going. There is some of your music where it seems like you are kind of directly poking at what you seem to be hypocrisy of the church.
Oh yeah, it's called poking the bear.
Yeah.
I don't.
You make it genuinely funny too.
Yeah, I mean, if what they've got is strong and real, it won't bother them. They won't care. I mean, I'm not the man I used to be. I still try to be humble and be open, but I don't go around saying I know I know what God is, and I know what's going to happen when we die, this or that. I no longer say that, because I think that's actually arrogant.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of like when a politician says, they put their thumb up in the air, like, the American people want this. It's like, well, the American people, like, you and I can get along fine, but we might want two completely different things. And that's okay too, that, all of us want different things out of our life. Everyone's got a different reality.
Yeah.
All right. So I got to ask you about this. In And a couple years ago, the Mississippi House of Representatives named March 27th Paul Thorn Day, which, because you've been a huge promoter of your home state, how did that come about? And that must have been pretty cool too. I mean, it's nice. Huh?
It was. I have to give credit to our former state representative, Steve Holland, who is a music fan, and he's followed me for all of my career, and he's encouraged me, and I've just became friends with him, and it was kind of his brainchild. He decided that he wanted to put this before the Senate, and they all agreed. And so I got to go to the Capitol building, and they had a ceremony, and they gave me a plaque for my contribution to the arts and my contribution to the state of Mississippi. And it's, it's pretty cool, because usually to get a day, you have to be shot or dead. So I didn't have to get assassinated. And if you get a street named after you, you're probably going to have to be killed. But you can get a name of a day and still be alive.
Ain't that the truth, man? All right, Paul Thorn, thank you so much for being on the show. His latest album is called Never Too Late to Call. It was out August 6th. And I know you're touring a lot this summer. You're back on the road now that we're kind of getting over COVID. Hopefully that is for good. We don't enter back. But Paul, thank you so much. This has been such a treat to have you on the show, and we really appreciate your time.
I appreciate you, Aaron, man, and you do a good job on your show, and I hope your following continues to grow.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it. Hey, folks, if you made it this far, and judging by our numbers, you haven't, thanks for listening to the Loadout Music Podcast. You can always find us at loadoutmusic.com and wherever you like to get your podcasts, like iTunes or SoundCloud. And of course, as always, thanks to Gaslight Studios for hosting us. Have a good one.